because this is Pint of Science. Your beverage?
Should I not do the Coke ad? Actually, there was a joke a couple of years ago. I always turn up when I'm lecturing to either with a Diet Coke or a no sugar Coke. Mm-hmm. And my students were apparently sort of taking bets on which I'd turn up with. And then someone wanted to scam it by actually providing me with a drink one week so that they could get it 100% right.
Oh, that's good.
Devious.
Yeah, I think they deserved it.
Yeah.
Man, when that stuff came out, I was like, I hope this stuff is good because I'm going to be drinking a ton of it. Emma, I'm going to go to you. What was your beverage?
My beverage was a water.
Oh, your beverage was a water.
Oh, purist. Very good.
Water, so that it doesn't interfere with my sleep tonight.
Very good. Very good.
Of course. Well, then I'm screwed. Okay, and Georgia, yours.
Yeah, I'm actually missing a beverage. It's 10 o'clock.
Oh.
All right, so no pint, all science. Cool. Hello and welcome to this episode of Because Language, a podcast about linguistics, the science of language. I'm Daniel Midgley, and with me now, her knitting is high quality, but somehow still lo-fi. It's Hedvig Hiergaard.
Thank you very much. My knitting is not very good. I started with 40 stitches and somehow got to 65, and now I'm trying to slim it down. I don't know how I did it. I'm learning how to undo it.
Combinatorial explosion. Don't fight it.
I wasn't going to make like a circle as a scarf. I wanted to make a rectangle.
Circular scarves are dope. You should embrace the randomness.
Maybe.
Ben Ainsley is out tonight. We miss him. We love him. So do you. Now, Hedvig,
yes.
This is a Pint of Science show, a collab with Pint of Science, which is an organization that helps to promote science in pubs around Australia. We've done a live show with Pint of Science before, but we're all online in our lives these days, so here we are online as well. I believe this is what's known as a takeover show, but it's not clear if we're taking over Pint of Science or are they taking over us?
Yeah, I guess they're taking over us. That's how I read it.
I guess I'll just have to be okay with that.
Yeah, I'm okay with that.
I feel like I'm kind of taking over them a little bit as well. Just there's a commensalism going on.
Commensalism. Oh my God, what words?
That's what we do.
It is. Words is what we do. It's true.
We also have guests who will be telling us about their cutting-edge research in language or language-adjacent topics. So I'm really looking forward to that. They're super awesome. Their work is really interesting.
Yes, this is going to be a really fun episode. We're going to have a lot of researchers talking about their own research. Usually we maybe do one per episode, and this time we have 3. So it's going to be pretty exciting.
Yeah. Hedvig, what is your beverage, since this is Pint of Science?
Yes. I have coffee and water because I am in Germany and it is not really pint drinking hour, I'm afraid.
No.
It is a Sunday and tomorrow is a public holiday, so I guess...
Oh, what are you doing? I like how you have both the coffee and the water to avoid the dehydrating effects of the coffee. The mildly diuretic effects.
This is, you know how they say that certain traits skip a generation? Like me and my grandmother are both really into having preferably more than 2 beverages at any one time.
Oh, wow.
So we'll drink like milk, water, coffee, and juice, like next to each other. Just
line them up.
Yeah. Beer and coffee is a favorite of mine, yeah.
Beer and coffee, isn't that what they call a shandy? I don't know my alcohols.
No,
okay,
you
good
don't.
To know.
No, that's not a shandy. For anyone listening, Daniel, how long have you not had alcohol for, or have you ever had alcohol?
Infinity years. I have never drunk alcohol. But for now, I'm having a brown cream soda. They make a 0 sugar variety now, and so I'm having that.
Sounds good.
All right. Let's get to it in a segment that I'm calling Boo France. So this is France's education ministry, the president of which is somebody from the Académie Française, who is coming out against gender inclusive language. Hedvig, we've done shows on French gender inclusive language before.
And also on the Académie Française, I believe, has been spoken about in this show before. The Académie Française is a bit unusual when it comes to language academies in that they have a fairly conservative and fairly outspoken attitude. They will say, this is how it should be done and this isn't how it should be done. For example, the Swedish Academy will just say, we describe language. And they won't generally issue these kinds of strong things. So that's the first thing to notice. Académie Française is a bit special in that. The other thing is about...
Would we say precious? Would precious be a good way to describe that?
Precious? I don't fully understand what English means by precious, except when it comes to stones. So don't ask me.
Okay.
But yeah, so I know that there's a discussion in a couple of languages that have grammatical gender in their languages that has the categories of masculine and feminine. There's a discussion whether or not it's a good idea to have a gender neutral version of things like teacher or professor. So here in German, for example, if you're a man, you're a professor, and if you're a woman, I think you're a Professorin.
Okay.
I think that's the distinction. And yeah, some people say you should have a gender neutral version, that's good. And then other people say, no, you should have a gendered version because then it becomes obvious how few women there are in places. You make gender more visible, and that's a progressive idea as well. So I know there are a lot of conflicting emotions about it. So tell me, what have they been doing?
Well, here's what they have been doing, and we reported on this. It was our French correspondent, Dr. Sophie Richard, a couple of years ago, who told us about this. So let's just say that you have a bunch of male friends, or you have a bunch of female friends, or it doesn't really matter what their gender is.
Oh, yes.
Normally in French, what you have to do is you have the word ami, A-M-I, which is the word for one friend. My male friend is an ami, A-M-I. My female friend is an ami, A-M-I-E. But if it's a bunch of male friends or mixture, it's A-M-I-S, but if they are all women friends, then it's A-M-I-E-S. So what they've been doing is just sort of making it possible to sort of derive every possible combination by just doing this, saying A-M-I dot E dot S. And the Académie Française has come down on those infernal dots, because if you use a bullet like option 8 on your Mac keyboard, that's a pretty chunky character to stick in the middle of that word, especially twice.
So this is where, like in English, for example, you might say, bring a friend, or like, I was out with my friend, and then you could do parentheses, S, parentheses, meaning either one or several friends.
Yeah, sure.
Right?
That would be a way to do it.
And instead of using parentheses, they're using dots. So are they coming down on the practice of doing the alternative things, or the dot instead of the parentheses? Because I'm with them on the dot, because I don't like
the dots are ugly. If you use anything, you should use option 9, which is a much nicer sort of dot. It's the smaller dot. But here's what they're saying. They're saying, this is Hélène Carrère d'Ancos, the perpetual secretary of the French Academy, the Académie Française, and Marc Lambron, he's the current director of the French Academy. They've said that the use of this in schools is, quote, harmful to English, by the way, English quote and translation, harmful to the practice and intelligibility of the French language. They say, with the spread of inclusive writing, the English language, already quasi-hegemonic across the world, would certainly, and perhaps forever, defeat the French language. Is this not a weird thing to think?
This is a lot of things at once. So it should
there's a lot going on here.
Académie Française and like French society in general is generally, like, institutionally against the idea that English is the one only international language that should be spoken. In fact, now with Brexit, people have raised the concern that, like, maybe EU negotiations should be more often in French than in English, because now it's Ireland and Malta that are the English speakers in the Union, actually.
Yep.
But that's not the same. Like, this gender inclusive language doesn't necessarily need to be a power move from English.
No, it doesn't. And that's why it's so weird. I mean, it's like the Academy's so scared of change. They're like looking over their shoulder at English. Oh, no, it's coming. It's weird for them to think this. Is it my imagination, or do prescriptivists just kind of not really understand how language works at all?
No, I don't want to say that. I think the Academy of France understands how language works. I think they might be doing a lot of things at once. Because I know that, for example, I think it was Macron or someone else in France had said that one benefit if the European Union would switch to using more French is that the European Union would adjust to, would include French ways of thinking. So they're doing some subtle warfare. So
yes, they are.
I had a long discussion with a guy at a party who claimed that French is the only language you can do philosophy in because it's
please. I have heard that too.
In the correct way. So I think they are tying this together, that gender inclusive language, they attach with an Anglo way of thinking. And they see this thing as like a borrowing of English into French. I think they do. I think that's probably maybe wrong and not a link, but I think they're making that link. I think they're very superior warfium about this.
And therefore they don't really understand how language works. This is what I'm kind of on about here. I just viewed the Académie Française as entirely malign. They've moved from French protectionism, we got to keep all the foreign words out. Now they're fighting against gender inclusive language. Are they for anything good or are they just jerks? I vote jerks.
I think the news we hear about them are jerks. I'm going to be the nice guy in this dichotomy. I think the French Academy do good things as well that we don't hear about. We hear about them when they go bonkers.
Okay, so 1 vote jerks and 1 vote secret heroes.
No, just like
superheroes, underground.
We don't have to sensationalize because we only hear about them when they do weird things.
Yeah, like jerks. Yeah.
Okay.
Now there was one bright spot here. The French Teachers Union, the SUD Education Union, has issued a statement saying that they're not on board. They say, quote, SUD Education demands from the minister that he stop trying to impose his backwardness on the educational community. SUD calls on staff to take no account of these instructions from another time and to exercise as they wish, depending on professional situations, the full use of their pedagogical freedom. End of quote. I think that's interesting that they're casting it as a freedom thing.
That's very interesting.
Yeah. So, yay, France?
Good things can come out of disagreements.
Okay. In other Yay France news, we have a new, more diverse French dictionary online. Take a guess, Hedvig. And you at home. French is an official language, for better or worse, in how many countries?
Well, I'm going to do my Eurovision report in a little bit. So I've brushed up on this a little bit. I know that...
Oh, okay.
I mean, because Switzerland, essentially. So it should be Belgium, Switzerland, France, Canada on the national level, but not all provinces and territory level. And then there's a bunch of West African countries that will have French, like Cameroon might have it. A bunch of other ones, Senegal would have it. So a whole heap there. And then maybe one of the South American countries next to Suriname would maybe have it. And then the islands in the Caribbean that speak French, I think they're technically part of France. So that just counts as France. French Polynesia is part of France. New Caledonia is part of France. Then there's French Indochina. I don't think any of those countries still have French as an official language, though.
No, it's kind of a minority language, but it's still in there.
Yeah.
All right, so
yeah.
At first I was impressed by the depth of your response, but now I'm thinking that you're playing for time. How many countries, Hedvig?
I'm going to guess 12 to 15.
Oh, that's a good guess. My first guess was way off. I'm not even going to say what it was. The answer, 29.
Yep. Okay. Yeah.
Yep. That's it. And you nailed the places as well.
That's a lot of African countries.
Yes, it is. As with English, most French speakers are not French. So,
yeah.
Last week we had International Francophonie Day. That means French speakers. And it turns out we have a new online French dictionary from the French government, which has a lot of French words from countries that are not France. It's the Dictionnaire des Francophones. Contains about 600,000 terms and expressions. That's a lot. And one of the cool parts, it has etymologies. I feel like English etymology is really it's been worked over. There's a lot of it, but I haven't seen a lot in other languages. This has etymologies for French words.
I think most major European languages would have decent etymological dictionaries, I think.
They would. And
I should say, I can say if anyone who's learning French, if you find French French hard, especially Parisian French, I can really recommend looking up some recordings of people speaking either West African or Swiss French, because it's just clearer. I don't know how to say it, especially West African French. If you're an L2 learner of French, it's much, much easier to understand. Okay. It just is. The
thing I love about this dictionary is that it explicitly intends to take words from these countries. That's super cool. Yeah, it is really cool. The quote, "The idea is to create a dictionary of world French and decentralized, featuring words from French-speaking countries that aren't France." You can go to dictionnaire-des-francophones.org. There's a link on our blog, becauselanguage.com, and you can check that out. Yay.
That's super cool.
Okay, we have now the Eurovision report. Hedvig, have you got that report?
Yes.
Fire away.
So, hello everyone. I don't know how many people who are on this call watched Eurovision last night. I know that Australia's broadcast is currently going on. So some people might have watched it live. Some people might be watching it after the fact. But we are going to broadcast this after the fact. So spoilers are not a concern, because you all should know who the winner is. Does anyone here not want to know who the winner is?
Skip about 12 minutes. Just kidding, not 12 minutes. Skip about 2 minutes.
Eurovision happened last night, and there are a lot of language news associated with it. I'm going to go through them in a brief fashion. So for starters, several entries were not in English. Russia, for example, competed with a song in Russian. We had a few sentences of English in it. The performer, who's originally from Tajikistan, Manitsa, said the following: "It's important for me to preserve the Russian language. I sing in English myself, and I understand how cool it is. But when I watch Eurovision, I always think how cool it is to sing in the native language, as Portugal did with Salvador Sobral, and Serbia with Maria Serifovic." So I don't know if you know, but Portugal won a couple of years singing in Portuguese, and we had several entries following in this fashion this year. So we had Spain, who sang in Spanish. Switzerland sang in French, which is only spoken by, but 22.9% of the Swiss population, so it's not the largest language of Switzerland. We had Ukraine performing entirely in Ukrainian with an electro folk song. We had France singing in French. That's to be expected. That's usually the case. Mm-hmm. We had Serbia singing in Serbian with a bit of Spanish. We have Italy, who won with a hard rock entry in Italian. So I counted to 7 out of 26 finalists singing mostly in not English. It should be noted that Portugal did sing in English, despite winning in Portuguese a couple of years ago. All Scandi entries were, as usual, entirely in English. It's a bit disappointing. Another noteworthy language news from Eurovision 2021 was that Netherlands competed with an entry in English, but also with Sranan, which is a Creole from the former Dutch colony of Suriname. I haven't heard much Creoles or Pidgins in Eurovision, so I thought that was pretty exciting. Another thing I noted about Eurovision language-wise was that there's this tendency to use Spanish randomly in song as a shorthand for party. So we saw this, for example, both with Cyprus, who sang about El Diablo. The rest of the song was in English, but then it was like El Diablo, and that was very sensual and passionate and cool. And then we also had Serbia, who sung almost entirely in Serbian, but also talked about going loco. Oh. And I think it's just something people just perceive Spanish as
the party language. Yeah.
You also see a lot of songs in English where people just randomly count in Spanish for no good reason. Perhaps the most famously, Offspring, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Russian entry last year also just had a lot of counting in Spanish for seemingly no good reason whatsoever. It's just cool to count in Spanish somehow. We also had Malta performing with a song entirely in English, but with the refrain with a French slang phrase, je me casse, I'm out of here. And they also sang, excuse my French, and then the refrain, je me casse. French is not an official language of Malta. The official languages of Malta are Maltese and English, and Maltese is a Semitic language. I don't know why they sang in French. If someone could tell me. I have no idea.
Excuse my French is a funny thing that Americans say when they're about to swear.
Yeah, so it's a funny pun to say excuse my French and then actually sing in French.
Yeah, that's right.
That seemed to be the extent of the joke.
Okay.
But I don't really know why. Yeah. And then my last piece of Eurovision news is just briefly about the music. So this contest saw the highest ever note. It was a B6 whistle note. That's the highest note that's ever been performed in Eurovision history. For those who don't know, Eurovision has been going on since the 1960s, so that's a fair bit of history to have been going on. We also saw the longest ever note, a 17-second F-sharp 5. Steve and I tried to diagnose it just before we got on the call. We think it's an F-sharp 5. That's from Moldova. And the highest note ever was from Israel, from their performer Eden. So yeah, a lot of fun things happened at Eurovision last night. If you're not a person who likes Eurovision, I can recommend getting into this kind of Eurovision, just noting down who's voting for who and the languages and things. It's quite fun. Yeah.
Whistle register is a very, very interesting phenomenon. Men can't do it. Women can.
It's not whistling. It's, I don't know how to explain this.
It's whistle register, which is a special way of using your voice that gets super high.
Yes.
Everyone associates it with Mariah Carey, of course.
Yes, exactly.
Kind of
when
thing.
she goes like, super high.
Minnie Riperton is also, back from the 70s, is also associated with whistle register. I had a language-related question. So the Italian band had...
Yes.
a character in it. It had a ring A, an A with a ring on top, which is not normally used in Italian. What's up with that?
No. And first when I saw it, so their band name, the Italian band name is Måneskin, or it's Danish. So usually when you see funny diacritics in hard rock or metal bands, like Motorhead, which spell them Motorhead for no good reason.
No, and Mötley Crüe, of course.
Yeah, that's just being funny and putting diacritics on for no good reason. But this A with a dot is actually a Scandi letter signifying or. So they have a Danish name. Yeah.
And does it mean what is it? Do we know what it means?
Moonshine.
Okay. Yeah, I thought if you're doing metal diacritics to be cool, you have to use umlauts. You can't use ring. No, what are you doing?
Yeah, exactly.
No tilde.
When I saw it first, I thought it was a metal diacritic, but it's not. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you very much, our Eurovision correspondent, Hedvig Hurgaard.
Was that fast enough for you?
That was great. I really enjoyed that. Thank you. Looking forward to next year. All right, let's get on to a research piece that I really liked. I thought this was so cool, but do you want to take us in?
Oh, I just had to have a breather after that. I tried to go Eurovision as fast as possible. Next up. No, I don't. No, I want you to do it. Okay, I know what this one is. No, yeah, you do it. Yeah.
Okay, this is work from Tim Bott from the University of London and Johann Mattes List from the Max Planck Institute, published in Diachronica. So we know that if you want to know what languages were like way back, you take a look at existing languages, what they're like now, and then you sort of work your way backward to figure out what the earlier proto-language forms were. And you can do that even when no written records exist. But this was an interesting sort of related project from these two. They used it to make predictions for a language that does exist, but maybe the language hasn't been studied. Maybe the language has been studied, but the lexicon is kind of incomplete and there are gaps because, you say to somebody, hey, what's your word for blah? And maybe they don't know what a blah is, and they're not able to quite say it right. So there's a gap. So they took a look at gaps for a language family that exists today. It's languages from the Western Ko-Boa family, which is a Sino-Tibetan subfamily. So the first thing they did was they took a look at all the words that they had, and then they used that knowledge to figure out what the words should be for the gaps. And then they invented the words, and then they published them. They put them out there first so that they could say, here are our guesses, come at us. And then they went there and they saw if those words were right, and about 76% of the time they were.
Yeah, it's
which
pretty
is super cool,
isn't it?
I love it.
Yeah, it's super cool. I should say, for full disclosure, so Mattes List is a colleague of my department, so I am familiar with this work. And
what am I doing talking about
cool. I was just a bit winded from the Eurovision. I just I'll let you do it.
I was too.
You did it beautifully. Yeah. So when you predict languages, you can both predict proto-languages, but if you have a known tree for all of these things, you kind of need some sort of tree or some sort of understanding of the relationship between the languages. And then you can also do what's called like infer unknown states, which is like other languages that are tips in the tree. You can try and infer them. Well, lots of different methods of doing it. I'm having fun doing a similar thing for Oceanic, but for grammar. It's tons of fun. It was a super cool project. I really like it.
Would this be top 10 really of the year? Like, are we going to see this one again in our top 10 rundown?
I think this is a really fun research. I particularly like the idea of first putting it out there, like you said, and putting it on record. There's a thing called, what's it called? When you pre-register a study, you can do that as well. Before you do a study, you can go to a repository and say, I'm going to ask this thing with this data, and then I'm going to get back to you in a few months, and you're going to hold me accountable that I tested it in particularly the way I said I would. And this is to prevent various kinds of p-hacking or manipulating of results where you try and fit your results to what you want to see as the answer to your hypothesis.
That is really true, because you could say, oh, well, this word has semantically drifted a bit, or it looks a lot like a different word that is kind of related, and then blah, blah, blah. But if you pre-register...
There are lots of ways of... Exactly, there are lots of ways of grooming your results.
Precisely.
If you're not holding yourself accountable. So that's super cool. Yeah.
Okay, I like it. So let's go on to our last news story. You know Uggs?
Yes.
Do you have any Uggs?
No.
Do you know where the word comes from? The special fleecy boots that everyone loves to wear and that are so fashionable.
Yes, very Australian.
That's going to come up.
They're Australian by origin, no?
They are.
Yeah.
But they quickly jumped to different places, which is where our story kind of starts. But do you have a guess as to the etymology? Why Ugg?
Is it an abbreviation of? Universal Garment Gopher.
By George, you're correct. It's the Universal Garment Gopher. Who people thought that the woolly fleece looked like gopher fur when they traveled. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just shitting you.
Yeah, don't do that.
Okay, sorry.
I'm a very gullible person.
Now, we've spoken about genericide before, when a product can be so successful that it becomes a generic term for anything like it. For example, aspirin used to be a trademark name. Any others?
Velcro.
Spam.
Spam. Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Heroin.
Oh, good one. Good one. Escalator.
Heroin was a brand name.
Heroin was a brand name.
They probably didn't mind being disassociated with that.
They called it that because it was like, a heroine of a novel or a hero of a story. Yeah.
And I think it was particularly marketed as soldiers. The heroin, like it'll be free from pain.
What a time, Have you got a cold? Have some cocaine mixed with heroin. We will fuck you up.
Yeah.
Okay, well, this is kind of like that, but in reverse. So Ugg boots, as you say, Hedvig, did start in Australia. We start seeing references in 1916 to fug boots. Oh,
fugly? Something like that?
Well.
They're fugly boots?
They were in 1913?
I don't know. Maybe.
Okay, so pilots and navigators used to wear these things because they keep your feet warm when you're in an open cockpit, and that's kind of important. So people in 1916 were writing about thigh-high sheepskin fug boots, and it's thought that this refers to not fucking ugly boots, but flying ugly boots.
Okay. Yeah, still fugly.
Still fugly.
Yeah.
And I thought, wait a minute, is this one of these things where, like snafu, where it was a military thing and it meant fucked up, situation normal, all fucked up, but they didn't want to say that to civilians, so they would say all fouled up? Could it really have been fucking ugly boots? But they just said that it was flying ugly boots. And I think probably not, because the first reference we have to actual fugly, like fucking ugly, is from the 70s. And that would be a long time for that term not to appear anywhere and then suddenly pop up later.
Yeah.
So,
what's the story?
The story is, they started in Australia, they quickly moved to America, And in Australia, it was always used generically. Anybody could make Ugg boots, didn't matter. Anybody could use it. But while all this was going on, another company, Decker's Outdoor Corporation, registered the Ugg trademark in the USA, starting in about 1985. So that's a long time ago. And they definitely did not think it was generic. So fast forward to about 5 years ago, there was a guy, Eddie Uyghur, founder of Australian Leather. He sold a few pairs online in the USA, and as a result, the US manufacturer went after him and said, no, this is our trademark. We've had it since 1985.
Oh, God.
Now all the Australians are like, no, that's not right. This is generic over here.
Yeah. Oh, God.
So it's become a whole big thing. And
it's like the we talked about before about the Bula bar, I think. Bula means hello in Fijian, and there were bars in America who were like, no, it's a trademark of our bar, it's the Bula bar. And Fijians were like, it literally means hello. Like, you can't trademark hello.
But
and,
exactly. And that's the whole, so that's where this has become a whole thing, because Australians are like, hey, those Americans have taken our trademark from us. And so an American appeals court rejected the Australian argument, and so it looks like a setback for Mr. Uyghur of Australian Leather.
I'm sorry. We need to think of a new term then. We'll if you have a good idea for another term that he can sell Ugg boots in America under that's funny and good, then send it in and we'll try and popularize it. Fug boots. There you go.
Maybe. Yeah. Fug boots. Yeah,
easy.
Of course. The thing is, they're only Uggs if they come from the Ugg region of Australia. Otherwise, they're just sparkling boots.
Oh, I see. Very good, very good.
I will never get sick of that meme. I will never get sick of it.
We had a lot of news. That was fun. But we have some lovely, lovely guests who we'd like to bring in.
Yes, we would. We've got Emma Schimke of the University of Queensland, Georgia Dempster of the University of Melbourne, and Kirsten Ellis of Monash University. Let's start with Emma, who's going to be taking us to her research of sleep and word learning. Emma, hi. How's it going?
Good. How are you?
Great. Thanks for listening to all that.
Thanks for having me on the show today.
It's a pleasure.
Yeah, it's super fun to have you here.
Tell us about your work in your own words. What do you do?
Yeah, so I'm really interested in sleep and memory consolidation. And in particular, I'm interested in the role that sleep plays in new word learning.
Right. So I'm also very interested in sleep for many reasons. I enjoy just napping.
I'm a bit of an enthusiast.
I'm a bit of an enthusiast. I do love a good sleep. So are you going to be able to tell us if all these news that we hear about, like these tapes that you can play while you're sleeping and you'll wake up speaking fluent French, is that a thing?
I would love to say it's a thing. I think I could make a lot of money if it was a thing, but
Indeed.
There are some interesting things going on in the world of research at the moment, though, where actually they're able to reactivate memories during sleep by pairing them with stimuli such as odor cues or auditory tones, and they'll pair the memory trace with that before sleep. Then they'll play the tone or spray the odor during sleep, and it will actually reactivate the memory, which is super fascinating.
How do you know that it's so is that you like I'll just if I have a perfume and I always spray it when I pet my cat, and my partner sprays the perfume when I'm sleeping, will I dream about petting my cat or will I remember it better?
Yeah, it's about remembering the memory better. But I wish that was my PhD topic, but that's just something else that's going on in the world of research at the moment. So my topic's more looking at encoding new words before having a sleep. Then the participants go have a sleep, and then we test their memory again after they've had a sleep at home in their own bed.
Right.
And we compare this to a group of participants who stay awake. So they learn the memories at the beginning of the day, stay awake all day, and then we retest them at night. So I'm comparing the two groups with my research.
So do the people who sleep remember things better?
Yeah. So So we're looking at both young and older adults, and with the young adults, we found that the participants who slept did indeed remember more words than the group who stayed awake. But with the older adults, there was no difference whatsoever between the groups.
I wonder why.
Oh.
Yeah, so there's lots of interesting things that happen across the lifespan with language and sleep. So with the older adults, there's changes in relation to language can include, so your vocabulary will get bigger, but then you might have more difficulty retrieving the words. So you might have what's called that tip of the tongue phenomena, where you know what you want to say, but you can't quite recall it. I'm sure we've all had that at one stage or another.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. At this point, I got to ask, I mean, what even is sleep? What's going on with our brains during sleep?
Yeah, so that's an awesome question. So what happens while we're sleeping with memory consolidation is that there's specific characteristics of sleep that are thought to reactivate and strengthen new memories. So when we acquire a new memory, it usually is acquired in the hippocampus, so in initial short-term storage in the brain. And then while we're asleep, specific aspects of sleep, such as slow wave sleep, so that's that deep sleep we have throughout the night, that's thought to reactivate and strengthen the memory. And overnight, the memory then shifts from that initial acquisition in the hippocampus into more stable, longer-term storage within the neocortex. And so they're able to, I guess, see these in research correlations between specific aspects of sleep architecture and then retention of new words or new memories.
Yeah, because I've heard that before, because for a long time, I thought that people weren't really sure why humans necessarily sleep, like what the point is of sleeping and sleeping the particular way that we do. And I've heard this before being floated as like maybe it's for consolidating memories from short term to long term. So there's some fact to back that up. It's very
that's right. Yeah. So I think, sleep used to be considered like, I guess, a luxury maybe in popular culture, but now we're starting to see how essential it is to health. And just one element of that is our consolidation of memories.
I heard a weird theory over the week that as far as dreams go, that dreams, you might be familiar with the term overfitting. It's where you learn all your training data, but you learn it too well, and then you only learn your training examples, and that doesn't help you with new stuff. So one idea about dreams, this, I might be going off on some weird thing here, but I'm just fascinated, and I've got you, so here we are.
Yeah.
The idea was that dreams are just like a bunch of weird data that our brains give us to prevent overfitting.
That's super interesting. Yeah. I mean, I don't know too much about dreams, but I do know that with memories, they're looking at the moment with sleep at the generalization of memories. So I'm not sure if that's similar to what you're talking about, but where we're able to generalize that memory trace to other situations or examples. So there's a body of research looking at that as well.
Sorry, this is Pint of Science.
Really
so
cool.
I'm like that guy at the pub who's like, no, but like dreams are just like these things that, man. Anyway.
Because there's different kinds of like learning and remembering, right?
Yeah.
Because like my little niece is learning lots of things right now, and she's learning words and things, but she won't remember like what happened yesterday, but she can like learn how to say hello. And it's like those are different things, like the episodic memory of like what happened yesterday and like how to walk and how to say hello and how to wave are like different kinds of stuff.
Absolutely, yeah. And in particular, I'm looking more at that episodic memory and the recall and recognition of memories or words. And in particular, I'm looking at two types of word learning. So one type is called associative learning. So that's where we might say, an example is the word cat. You might see your pet cat and you know to associate the word cat with that pet, or you might see a picture of a cat and you learn that association, or you might hear a word in a foreign language and you pair that with the word cat. The other type of learning I'm looking at is called contextual word learning, and that's where we infer the meaning of a new word through the semantic context in which it's presented. So that might be when we read a new book. An example is, say, Harry Potter, where there were lots of new words that when I was reading that, I wasn't sure what they meant, but I could work out what the meaning of the word was based on the context of the sentences or words around it. So I'm really interested in whether sleep has a different effect on these two types of word learning, because they actually involve different neural processes. And
I know what you mean, the second kind of contextual learning. I read books and sometimes there'll be like super words that are like really, really, really uncommon. The other day was an English word, like was it sursumulin? It's like the sound the brook makes, but an adjective.
Susurrative?
Yes, that word. And I saw it in a context and I was like, I have no idea what this means, but it sounds like it's a kind of noise that's low frequency. And my partner, Steve, just knows, I don't know how, but he has just learned all of these words. I can just ask him and he like says it directly. But most of the time before I try and guess it and I say, oh, is it a kind of noise that's like low frequency? He's like, yes, it's a type of. So very often from even in your native language, even in Swedish and in English, you can often guess, what words mean in their context quite accurately, I find.
Yeah, it's quite fascinating. And we looked at these two types of word learning at the lab. And so we had all these nonsense words so that we knew that the participants hadn't ever been exposed to the words before. They couldn't look them up at home. Yeah. And these words adhered to like the legal constraints of words within. So we were looking at English words. So the spelling of the words had to follow the rules of English. But they were all words that were completely made up, and then we embedded those in sentences or we associated them with pictures, and then that's how we had the participants learn these unfamiliar words.
And which do we have results on which one is working better?
Yeah, so far I've just looked at the associative one, so where we paired a word with a picture, and in this case we paired the words with pictures of aliens that the participants had never seen before. Which was, quite fun. And, found that sleep did boost that type of word learning, and we're still to look at the contextual data.
Oh, that's really cool then.
I'm really fascinated by little kids because I've got two of them right now. And when it comes to memory, like they don't have, my understanding is that they haven't grown their prefrontal gyrus to have super long-term memories, which is why we can't remember anything. Like one of mine is 2.5. She won't remember anything, but she's a genius when it comes to language. And I feel like they can remember a lot of stuff, so that's really good for their language learning, but they don't have other kinds of memory. Can you tell me anything at all about little kids' memory and language acquisition?
Yeah, so a little bit that I've read about is just around the importance of napping, actually, for children with their memory consolidation. So there's a real push at the moment to, prioritise napping, within the preschool or kindergarten environment, because it is important for not only word learning, but other types of learning throughout the day. Yeah.
Napping is important. I agree.
And now we can all, say, let's have yay to having a nap, right? Because science backs it up.
Yeah.
So it sounds like what we're saying is the upshot is if you are a second language learner or you're trying to acquire a language, don't shortcut on sleep.
That's right. And so there's that, dilemma when you're a student where, do you stay up all night to cram or do you just give up and go to sleep? But what if you actually, by going to sleep, you're actually consolidating those new words? So it's a win-win.
True. Fantastic. Emma Schimke of the University of Queensland. Now, what I'm going to have you do is I'm going to have you move over one spot on the couch. But stay with us. Don't go away because there are 3 hosts now. You are one. And we're going to invite Georgia Dempster of the University of Melbourne to come on, who is looking at how officials communicate information about COVID to the public. Georgia, thanks for coming on with us.
Yeah, thanks very much for having me. Basically my PhD is about communicating public health related information to public audiences. And I applied my PhD into a couple of different studies, but one study that I'm completing at the moment is about the communication of COVID-19 related information to the public. And in this study, I've recruited public health experts, both sort of researchers, clinicians, and people who work in sort of Department of Health type area, and I've interviewed them about their experiences of communicating in media, because I want to understand their experiences. So, how we could do things better, basically, as the communication of COVID information to the public is vital in terms of the population's sort of behavioural response, including things like vaccine uptake and wearing masks. It's important to understand how, we communicate to minimise the spread of disease. So I'm currently analysing my interview data at the moment, so I can't really give you any solid outcomes of my work, but I do have one kind of interesting anecdote from a participant that I spoke to recently. They said when they communicate to public audiences that they really try and communicate with ethos, pathos, and logos. So ethos is about establishing the authority of the speaker, so being able to establish credibility of expertise in a field. And then pathos is about appealing to audiences' emotions. And then logos is about communicating using logic. So I think this is a pretty interesting takeaway for experts communicating to public audiences. You can't just explain things simply and logically. You really need to embody ethos and pathos as well.
So let me just break that down a little bit, because we do tend to focus on the logos, the words, the facts, the things. But you've also got to work on establishing your credibility as a professional. I get that. How do we work on pathos? How do we establish a connection with a public audience who we might not even be talking to face to face?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question. I guess when it comes to things like vaccines, if people are vaccine hesitant, you can't just dismiss their concerns. Like, you really have to try and understand them and be very empathetic in your communication and that kind of thing. So you can't just say, the risks are non-existent. You have to really be empathetic in the way you communicate with people.
Yeah, and communicate clearly. It's because we have those biases, don't we? For example, when it comes to risk in vaccines, that there's a natural bias that to do nothing, even if doing nothing, like the chance of being harmed by COVID are greater than the side effects of vaccines. But taking a vaccine is doing an action. So we tend to have a cognitive bias against doing things, even if the thing that we're going to do is less riskful. And that must be really hard to communicate, like with those cognitive biases in mind. Another thing I wanted to ask, besides ethos, pathos, and logos, another thing that I have experienced both with my Australian friends, and I live here in Germany, and my people in Sweden and British, is consistency. So you hear different advice from different authorities, or web pages are outdated or conflicting. Here in Germany is a federation, as is Australia. So you can get different information from different states. Yesterday, my partner and I did a COVID test at home, and we bought 2 different brands. And one of them said to swirl around your nose for 10 seconds, the other one for 15. That's a very minor difference, but we get a lot of variation all the time. And I wonder how, as communicators, people try and stay, because some of the inconsistencies make sense as well if the situation changes. If the next week, it is good if you do this and this instead of that, then it's going to be a dynamic situation. It is going to differ from place to place and time to time. But it seems like a lot of the credibility is often being doubted because people perceive the advice as inconsistent or unclear. What are communicators doing to mitigate that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think that there's a real place for disagreement, and I think that's okay. And I think in many ways it can be constructive if people are having like a respectful conversation in a public forum. I think it actually can help some people understand situations and differences of opinions. And I think as information evolves over time, as we learn more and more about COVID, people will disagree, and people will disagree with themselves too. Like, their opinion will change, and I think that's fine. I think one thing that is really problematic is when media are trying to create headlines by putting experts against each other and saying these experts disagree. So, this is terrible. And I think that's actually really, really harmful. And so I think instead of media focusing on experts disagreeing, it should actually be framed as like a helpful, healthy kind of disagreement. And I think that's okay.
I agree with you. But I'm also speaking, and I think so is everyone else on this call, as someone who's like fairly like science literate. Like I'm used to disagreements not necessarily being a bad thing, but a lot of people aren't, right? A large part of the population just wants to be told what to do and get clear advice and then get on with taking care of their kids and their work and, walking their dog. They don't want to have to sit and sift through different. Yeah, I don't know what I have to say, but it sounds incredibly difficult to try and do this communication well.
Yeah, sure. I mean, like maybe the go-to place for people who just want one source of information might be like your government's health department. But then I feel like health departments can also be a little bit outdated quite quickly. But then that's where academia comes into play, and like, the latest scientific evidence should inform government policy and that kind of thing. But if you can't be bothered sifting through the headlines, maybe the Australian government, for example, in Australia would be a good place to go to for the latest advice.
Well, let's talk about that for a second. So in the Australian government, with Australian experts, in the Australian media government scape, what do you find is going well and what do you find really needs to be changed?
Well, I think in Australia we have to recognise we've done a really, really good job. Like we don't have much COVID in the community at the moment, and I think that's for a number of reasons. Like firstly, we're an island far away from many other places, but also the communication has been very good and people have been following health advice. Like we've been wearing masks and social distancing and quarantining and all of that kind of thing. So I think Australia's actually done really, really well. I think that there are some things we could do better. I think we could communicate to culturally and linguistically diverse populations much better. I think there's been a complete and utter whitewash of, middle-aged white men speaking at press conferences. So I think there's a lot of things in that regard we could do better. But I think, Australia's actually doing really, really well. And I think it's also experts communicating in media and the media supporting, an agenda, not just picking people who are arguing with each other, but actually trying to communicate a really helpful message that's ultimately going to promote Australia's public health.
One last question. What about podcasts? Do you feel like they are doing a good job? There are lots of COVID podcasts. How are they doing?
I can't speak to the effect that they're having, but I know that, for example, like the Corona Cast on ABC that's hosted by Norman Swan, who's a physician and also a journalist, I think that might be daily, and that's like a constant update on the latest evidence with like Australia's best experts. And I think that's a really solid way to communicate, especially the updating information as the science changes over time. So I think they have an important place. I don't know the effect that they have, but I think it's a really good addition to the information that's available for people to consume.
Well, this is super important research, and I think it really has application more broadly to what we do. So thanks for that, Georgia. We're going to now move both of you over on the couch. Thank you very much. And we're going to talk to Kirsten Ellis of Monash University, who is making tools to encourage inclusion of people with disabilities, disabled people, including Braille keyboards and software for teaching sign language. So hello, Kirsten. Thanks for coming on.
Hi. Thanks for having me.
Great to see you. First of all, tell us about your main research before we get to the language stuff. What do you do?
Okay. So at the moment, I'm doing a lot of STEM engagement, and that means that I'm trying to make STEM available to people that don't usually participate. So one of the activities that I made is a circuit making activity that anyone can do. And if you have cerebral palsy, for example, can I actually show it or not?
Would you please?
You can show it and we can try to describe it. So it looks like two rectangular quadrants. They're yellow and red, and they have some sort of light on them.
That's correct.
The light is shining. And when you put the blocks together, they're shining, and when you separate them, they're not.
Yep.
So why?
Okay, so this is magic tape.
Magic.
This is conductive tape.
Oh, magic.
Well,
Hey.
so this is basically conductive tape, and it's a nickel copper. and all it does is it acts as wires, but it gives you a really big surface area so you can put them together. But it means that people with disabilities can actually engage in science, because all of a sudden, so if you've ever done breadboarding, these little tiny holes in straight lines, and you need really good vision to be able to do it, and it's just really hard. Or you can solder.
I had to solder in school.
And it's hot and it has really stinky fumes and gives me migraines. And so it's not but then you go, okay, so for people who are blind, how would they know if the light comes on?
That's a good point.
Can you hear that?
Oh, there's a little something else there. Oh, it's a little buzzing sound.
Yep.
Oh.
Cool.
So it's a vibration motor, and you can actually feel if the circuit is working. And then, of course, the proliferation of drones, they have these little tiny drone.
It's a fan.
Oh, it's a little propeller.
Yeah. So
that's spinning around.
Yeah. So these are called tape blocks, and they really are kids' EVA foam block wrapped in tape, and then a battery inserted or a component put underneath. You make them from scratch. Everyone can do it. And they're really, really versatile in terms of people can either use them pre-made if that's the level of disability that you have. So I've had people with quite significant disabilities pushing them together on wheelchair trays, or you can make them from scratch. So people with intellectual disabilities, school children can use them. And then, because I do STEM engagement, so I want to get kids interested in STEM, I want them to feel that technology and science is for them. So if I come into a classroom and say, this is
like let's
showing a
describe
thing
this
on camera that looks like I would say a Furby, because I was small in the 90s, but it's a fuzzy little thing with two big eyes and sort of white hair, and it has some sort of light that's going on and off. What's that? Yeah. All
his
right.
nose.
So it has a light up nose. So to make this, it's like 3 pieces of conductive tape, an LED and a battery, and it looks like a little fur creature with big eyes and blue wings. And I have hundreds of different versions of them. You can make trains, you can make dragons. I have lots and lots and lots of dragons because I'm really into dragons. So I'll just grab the battery off there.
So the idea is that you take these tapes and you put them together and you make a light shine, or you make the eyes shine. Oh, that's a very beautiful dragon you showed right there. And then you can learn about how electricity works, and maybe also learn some basic programming mechanisms of turning off and on and making chains and stuff.
And so you have tilt switches, all different types of components, and so you can learn about them. They're accessible to everyone. And it just makes it available to a whole lot of people who've never made a circuit before, which is really important to me. Cool. And it becomes about being me. So then you can do lots of different things with them. And it's to hook kids in, to hook. I work with adults with intellectual disability who have always been told, you cannot make a circuit, right? Because you can't solder or you can't breadboard or it's too hard. It's not that the activity is too hard. It's the way we go about doing it is too hard. So if we change the way that we do things, then they can participate. So then you go, if you can participate because we change the way activities are done, what other activities can we change so that everyone can participate? So it's really about activity design and really thinking about how do we design things so that everyone can participate.
That's super cool.
It is cool. And now we're getting to areas like, for example, Braille keyboards, which you have some experience with.
Yep. And
other accessibility items. Tell us more about that, if you wouldn't mind.
So I do a lot of stuff around inclusive technology. And we specifically chose inclusive as opposed to assistive because I wanted it to be about everyone being able to participate. So things like Braille keyboards, a lot of blind children don't actually learn Braille. And the reason that they don't learn Braille can be because their parents and teachers don't feel confident in supporting a child who's using Braille because they haven't come across it previously.
Let's just make sure because I know what Braille is and Daniel knows what Braille is, but not everyone knows what it is. Would you like to explain to us what it is?
Okay, so Braille is a series of dots for English Braille, English Unified Braille. It's 6 dots. each letter of the alphabet is represented by that cell of 6 dots. It also has a whole lot of contractions and shorthands, but just learning the basic letters, each cell represents a letter. Punctuation's covered. There's also Braille for music and maths.
Oh, I didn't know that actually.
IPA for Braille as well.
And we should say, so the dots are raised, so which means that if you're blind, you can put your finger on a line and you can run it across and you can read the letters.
Yes. So I do things like Braille keyboards for sighted people. So when I look at Braille, when I look at the dots, it looks like a rectangle of dots. And because I have prior knowledge to learning, I see it as a rectangle of dots, and I'm basically making those dots as I see them. When children are learning Braille from scratch, they actually learn Braille in a straight line when they're typing it, because of historically they used a Perkins Brailler, which was like a keyboard that you punched the dots, and there were basically six buttons on it that you punch the different dots in, and it strikes the paper, raises the dots, so that you can then feel it from the other side. Which is kind of cool. So I make a keyboard that just makes it easier to learn for sighted people, and not necessarily better for blind people, because they learn one dot at a time. So or one letter at a time. So they'll learn the letter A with all the other kids, and then they'll learn the letter B with all the other, and it's done much more slowly. Where as an adult, you tend to want to go, I just want to learn the entire alphabet in, a very short period of time.
I already know what an A is.
Yeah.
Can you tell me what that looks like? It's like learning another script, like another script that's vaguely like alphabetic. You're just like, I just want to know what A is. I don't need to like be told that A is an apple.
Yes, and especially when it's in the same language as what you're actually so if you're typing in English, you're spelling in English, and you're using Braille in English, then no, you don't need to be told that A is apple. And so there's some really interesting things with Braille. If you're actually typing Braille, you can type it faster than you can type standard text, because there's a whole lot of contractions. So TH, the, knowledge are all single cells. So you can actually get a lot faster. So if you want to get really fast on your typing, you actually type in Braille, and it's a chorded system. So you press multiple buttons at a time.
That reminds me of, have you seen those stenographer keyboards? I don't know if anyone ever wants to see some of this chord kind of pressing in action. We all know like Control F, you can tap them at the same time. And technically, I guess that's sort of like a chord in a way. You're accomplishing, or when you're doing just caps on your keyboard, you're also pressing more than one at a time, or an @ symbol, etc. But these are for Braille. You're saying that there are certain sounds like TH that is a chord. For stenographers, they have it for entire words, I think. So.
So in Braille, every letter is a chord. So A is a single dot at the top, B is the dot below it as well. So that's two together to make a B. And then, but if you type the letter space K space in Braille, that's word knowledge, because it's in contracted Braille. You're processing this, aren't you? You're going to go and have a look. Braille is just fascinating. You think that you think that as you're looking at Braille, like I read the signs on toilets just to practice using Braille all the time, and that is letter. That is letter for letter. So FEM, right?
T-O,
yep. But when there's a book or something like that, I can't remember how. Braille takes a lot of space by comparison, so they use a lot of contractions to bring it down. So it's actually quite complicated and sophisticated, incredibly sophisticated in its full form.
That's really cool. I didn't know that.
That is cool.
I find this work very interesting. I have a lot of like godchildren and nibbling, so I try and keep up with various ways of introducing STEM to children, like the Goldilocks engineering playthings where they learn about like a mousetrap type of tools, and these programming things. Is a fun game called Human Research Machine where you learn the basics of programming that I've been trying to get my nephew to play. Yeah. But all of these things are usually directed at able-bodied children. What's really interesting about this is ways of bringing in people who have other kind of functionalities as well.
And with the Braille, if you think about children who are sighted are able to see language, words written around them all the time, and blind children actually don't get that exposure to written language all the time. So it actually has to be introduced to them quite early on. So one of the pieces of research I've done with a colleague, Leona Holloway, is actually doing tactile stories. So you make stories or a story page, and then you put a vibration motor under the important thing or under something, and then the children feel with their finger in order to find that thing. And what they're doing is, and you have, make sure that you close your eyes and you feel the page, and you want to be able to feel the whale or feel the flower or feel, so that children actually learn that they can gain knowledge. Blind children can learn that they can gain knowledge by feeling. And that's really, it's a critical pre-skill to learning to read.
Because you're right, because when I was learning to read as a child, I would just obsessively read out everything I saw. Yes. It was actually quite a bother for my family when we were driving a car. I'd be like, stop, 60, supermarket, like whatever I saw out the window, I just like, no filter, would just like read. And it, of course, would help me to learn how to read because I just like got all this input. But yeah, if you're blind, you have to learn that you need to feel things to get information. Yeah.
Yep.
And what you're doing is helping differently able people get input. That's so fantastic.
Yeah, really cool. It's cool. And it's being inclusive. It's including people in the use of technology and that sort of thing, which is really exciting.
Let's bring all three of our guests back for a second, because I've got a question for all of you. Your work involves your subject area, the things that you've been doing, but it also involves, to some measure, public communication of science, because that's what you're doing here on a show tonight, and this is what Pint of Science is all about. What have you learned by your good experiences and your bad experiences about how you want to do science communication and how maybe it ought to be?
Why don't we start with Emma, who we spoke to most long ago?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so recently I participated in the 3-minute thesis competition where I had to summarize my whole PhD in 3 minutes, which was quite challenging. And I think the main takeaway for me was that to engage an audience, they had to be interested in my work out of curiosity or concern. And so I had to really think of, I guess, a hook to have them listen into why was my research important. And I think also translating what the implications are, so to the wider community, is so important, because as researchers, we can get very good at, writing up journal articles and publishing our output, but to be able to explain it in a way that's relevant to the wider community is essential to translate our research.
Yeah.
I have often thought about the nature of the hook, and it's something I try to do when we get a news story. It's like, oh, well, this is interesting. People will already know something about this. How do we get them in?
Mm-hmm. That's right. And it's like, why should they care? And so you really have to think about that for a second.
From the negative side as well, I also try and remind myself, I try to be sure that I can explain things to my mum. And if I can't, I try to say, okay, should I be doing this? Like, is this an interesting research? If I actually can't explain it to my mum and I can't engage a layperson, then that doesn't necessarily mean you shouldn't do that research. But for me, at least, it makes me do a little rethink and think, what can I do that is relevant? Because I do want to be able to connect. Personally, for me, that's like necessity.
Yeah. Georgia, what you got?
I guess one thing I've been thinking about recently is obviously, like, as researchers, we write academic journal articles, but one thing I've been doing recently is writing reports. So usually for funding organizations, they want their deliverables and reports, and the language that you have to write these reports in is so much simpler than academic journal articles. You can't have any jargon, you can't have any acronyms or any abbreviations. And it's really challenged me to just communicate my work in a much simpler way than I was doing before. And I already thought I was making considered effort to write simply, but I wasn't. And Yeah, it's a bit of a slap in the face about you really need to make your academic writing as accessible as it can be.
That's a very brave thing to be willing to do, because it sounds like it'd be a rough experience. I would find that rough, and probably you might get negative feedback the first time around you try it. And it's a very courageous thing to do.
Kirsten, how about you? What have you found?
I'm really into community impact. So actually taking research out of the research lab, out of the academic paper, and taking it out into the community. So I have spent a lot of time which I'm also not a very good academic. I work in a very, very obscure area. So there aren't that many academics that work in the area. I think there are, on my main research at the moment, I think there are about 3 papers available, maybe 5 if you sort of stretch the bounds of what it is. So mine is actually just engaging people and actually getting it out in the work that we're doing out into the community so that it has impact, so that people can actually use the tools that we're developing. Because a lot of great research is done that's never actually makes it out of the lab. So I have been doing a whole lot of YouTube videos. And so to put this in context, I have 200-ish citations. I have 5,000 YouTube views. So I know where my audience is, and it's not in academic papers.
Fair enough. Yeah. And I personally, I mean, we do this show, so we also like to talk to a lay audience, obviously. But no one says this to my face, but sometimes I worry that academics will perceive my research work as less mature or something because I engage in this kind of thing. Do you have such worries? Have you met with such concerns?
I absolutely and utterly struggle with the number of things that we're required to do as an academic in terms of, I'm actually very good at getting grants in terms of it. The work that I do, people can see will have impact. And then, but I want that impact to actually exist in the community and make it out into the community. I need to write papers, but there are so few people who actually are able to review papers that I've written in a meaningful way that it's actually really difficult. Yeah, look, I really struggle as an academic to actually work out where I should be fitting because and the other thing is that, I mean, I have worked in research in sign language teaching for children using technology. So I make puppets that you teach sign language with. There's no one else in the world doing that. So if I get 5 citations on a paper about that, then I have hit 100% of the researchers in the world. Not many people get 100% citations, right? But yeah. 5 doesn't look really good for my academic institution, So I there's this real tension of so I produce some sign language software that every child in Australia kind of had a copy. Every deaf child in Australia had a copy of. Mm-hmm. It doesn't fit into academia. It's sort of not. There's movements around to actually have more of an impact in, or have more weighting within academia. But you commented, but I guess the question is, where do we want to have our impact? And I'm glad I'm actually making a difference to people. That's why I started my PhD, and why I started my research career was actually to have an impact on people. So I think that if it depends what your motivation for being there is, and I know why I'm there, so that's okay.
I'm feeling that.
I feel particularly encouraged because I did my PhD at ANU, Australian National University, and our Vice Chancellor there, Brian Schmidt, made a statement a couple of years ago where he said something like, I am actively not caring about our rankings anymore because the rankings are clearly motivated by values and things that I don't necessarily think are the most important. So I'm going to promote work within our university that I think is good. And it might bring us down in the rankings, and I don't care. And he was my vice chancellor and a Nobel Prize laureate. So I was like, okay, you can have values outside of these rankings. I thought that was,
So I guess the feeling that I'm getting here, the takeaway from the 3 of you, is we need to focus on simplicity. We need to focus on utility, like how useful and how personally relevant our work is to members of the public. And also engagement, like public engagement, and all those things are very complex, but those are all great things. So thank you so much for sharing your work with us. That's Emma Schimke of the University of Queensland, Georgia Dempster of the University of Melbourne, and Kirsten Ellis of Monash University. Thanks so much for sharing your work with us on the show tonight.
No problem. Thank you.
We're now moving on to our favorite segment.
Word of the week. Word of the week. It's Word of the week. Ben's not here. Word of the week is our segment on the show where we bring up a word or a phrase that's been in the news lately. And we have some words prepared, or Daniel has some words. I have one phrase that I added just before the show.
Awesome.
But do any of our guests have any words that you've noticed in the week gone past that you think would nominate for this segment? You can say no.
No.
Yeah. It's a hard task. Every week when we record, I'm like, I don't know what's a good word. It's rare that I find a good word.
Yeah.
You know
Daniel's
what,
very good at finding them.
No, I'm not. They're staring us in the face all the time. Like, I totally missed plant-based, even though it was like everywhere. And I was just like, oh, that's a good word, plant-based.
This week, particularly?
Oh, no. This was last year.
That's because Beyond Beef.
Yeah, exactly.
It's hard. It's a hard task.
But I think I found a couple of good ones.
What do you got?
I got woke agenda. So, it seems that some folks in the military were observing Ida Hobit. Ida Hobit is the International Day Against Homophobia, Biphobia, Interphobia, and Transphobia. And this comes from the publication Out in Perth. We'll have a link to this article on our blog. Out in Perth is awesome. It says, earlier this year, Ida Hobit was highlighted to defense staff in an internal communication. It suggested staff could show support on the day by holding a discussion or hosting a morning tea. It was suggested that attendees could be asked to be conscious of people's pronouns or show their support by wearing rainbow clothing or a pin to show they are an ally. That's the end of the quote. But when Defence Minister and most loathsome political figure in Australia, Peter Dutton, found out about it, he put the kibosh on it. And here's the quote. I've been very clear to the chiefs that I will not tolerate discrimination, but we are not pursuing a woke agenda. So,
Right.
What is the woke agenda? Anybody know? I missed the memo. What is it?
Yeah, I don't fully understand this either, because as often when we talk about inclusivity, which often comes up when we talk about social justice in general, you can either see it as like a simple sort of HR and equality thing. So he says here, I don't tolerate discrimination. So that's something most people say and they agree on.
I'm not a racist.
I'm not a racist. I don't tolerate sexism. I don't tolerate racism. But discussing it or having a morning tea is somehow like more than just doing that.
Yeah.
It's not an instance of just being inclusive somehow. I don't know where that line is either.
I don't know.
Yeah.
So, but it looks like morning tea.
Yeah, I should explain maybe to our non-Australian listeners that Australians love to have morning teas that are themed according to different things. It's when at your workplace or education center, you go to a place and you have a cup of tea or coffee and a biscuit, and maybe someone talks and gives a little speech, and you talk to you.
Somebody you have some tea. Somebody brings a pack of those shitty Arnott's biscuits. No, I love the orange ones. I will eat the orange ones. But yeah, so it sounds like the woke agenda is morning tea and less systemic discrimination. Is that it? That's basically it. I like those things.
And I think he's exaggerating, and he's exaggerating because he's dog whistling too. Yeah, it's a. Yeah.
What's he dog whistling?
I don't have enough juice in me to give the full context.
Epic.
Yeah, who is he dog whistling to?
Well, yeah. So it seems to me like I've noticed something interesting about woke. It seems to be a replacement word. Like, if you don't want to say you're a racist or a homophobe, or that you don't want to say that you support those things, you could just say you're anti-woke, and it does the same job. I think people since the 90s have said politically correct, right? Complaining about politically correct stuff.
Yeah.
Which means I know that I have regressive views, but I don't want to change. So I'm going to externalize all that and complain that everybody else is wrong. And I'm not a terrible person. It's just that everybody else is too politically correct, too woke. They want to cancel you. And then you can feel okay about that because then they're the bad guys and not you.
Yeah, something like that. They feel like it's going too fast because things that were considered woke and too politically correct in the 60s are now considered very, very normal values. So there's a bit of a lag effect, I think.
I had never heard of woke until about 3 months ago. I woke to woke.
Oh, really?
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'd never heard of it as I'd heard of all the concept, but not under the label of woke.
Yeah.
So...
Isn't it from American Black English?
Yeah.
Originally? That might be why it's taking a while to get to Australia.
Yeah, there are references to it from the 60s. Also, the Erica Baidu-Trek master teacher was influential. And people make fun of it now. It's like, oh, those silly, well, like we say. It's used as a sneer term to make fun of people who are... Look, I'm a lefty. There's a lot to make fun of about me, all right?
Are you?
Fair enough.
Didn't know. Couldn't tell.
Fair enough. There are many of us who are trying very imperfectly to examine ourselves and try to be less racist and not be accepting of racism and sexism and homophobia and stuff like that. We don't always do a great job, okay? There's a lot to criticize. But anti-woke is a way of saying, yeah, you suck because you're too focused on social justice or you want things to move too fast or something like that.
And we're facing a situation increasingly where people are, bubbles and silos and all those terms that we used to say that people are perceiving different realities and therefore reading in different definitions of the words and assuming different things. So Peter Dutton, by someone having a morning tea talking about LGBTI issues, he's reading in a bunch more things that other people aren't. So, they load them with different meaning.
Like, for example, Dutton used the term again. He says, our task is to build up the morale in the Australian Defence Force, and these woke agendas don't help. It seems to me that if you're somebody who is LGBT, having our national organization showing their support would actually be very good for morale.
Yeah, especially because the military probably have people who are LGBTI in their ranks, and it's good if they don't leave their ranks. They need people to fight the wars.
Okay, so woke agenda, that's one. Hedwig, you got yours?
Well, it has to be, I'm sorry, it has to be Nil Point.
Nil
from
Point.
Eurovision. I'm wrapping it up with Eurovision again. So
it's only once a year,
Nil
folks.
Point. It's only once a year, and I got mad for it for that week and then not at all for the rest of the year. But UK received 0 points from the jury and 0 points from the public.
Ouch.
This happens sometimes in Eurovision, but it's not that common. Also, Spain and Germany and Netherlands also got 0 from the public vote, but UK was the only one who got 0 in total. In Eurovision, they read out the points in French and English. So they say 0 points, nil point.
So I noticed that in French it's nul point, but in English we kind of go back and forth between nil point and nul point. They're both about as popular.
Yeah, I think the UK entry wasn't that bad. And when it was announced, he sort of got up and, went like, well, I'm here and we're having a good time. All the other artists got up and applauded. And It was a special moment. But I think, there's Brexit. There is the perception in Europe that UK maybe has been not doing vaccine policy the way everyone else wanted to. So there's a lot of politics that go into this. It wasn't a shit song, but got nil point.
Okay.
It's once a year. Every year, Daniel, I'm going to talk about Eurovision on this show.
I am here for it. I love music. I love silly things. I've got weird hobbies as well, Let's go on to our last one. Kitty on our Discord channel says that she's been vaccinated, and Lord Mortis says that in 2 weeks she'll be Maxinated. Our word of the week, maxinated. Any guesses as to what it means? Yes, Kirsten.
Had the maximum number of vaccines required?
Theoretically, there's no maximum. Not yet, anyway. No, I love it. Emma?
Yeah, I was going to say that they've had 2 doses of the vaccine that were required.
Yes, you are both correct. You've received, you've maxed it. You've maxed out. You've had both of them. And so people are this is starting to turn up on podcasts. It's starting to show up. Interestingly, 2 X's in maxinated.
Because of vaccinated having 2 C's?
That is
not
not an answer that I had considered, but that is actually a really good answer. The vaccinated has 2 C's. Why should vaxxed or maxinated not have two X's. I just wondered where that started, and I noticed this tweet from Benjamin Dreyer at BC Dreyer. Who decided to double the X in anti-vaxxers and vaxxed, and what can I do to get back at them? I was interested in the first question, not so much the second. So I decided I was going to head over to the Google Ngram Viewer, which is a massive database, millions of words over hundreds of years. I decided to look up anti-vax, anti-vaxxer, and anti-vaxxers, because that was the three phrases that I thought I would encounter this the most. So, curious fact number 1, anti-vaxxer double X, much more popular, about 4 or 5 times more popular than the single X version, has been since about 2003. Anti-vax with 2 X's does not appear at all, with a hyphen or without. So that's one thing. Curious fact number 2, I can't find any older words with 2 X's. It just does not come up.
Huh.
Like fixer and waxer and relaxer, only 1 X ever. I could find one in a new word, and that is doxing, which is revealing the real-life information like an address or identity of somebody else online.
Yeah.
But that was the only one. And then curious fact number 3, when we double consonants, it's usually because we're changing the vowel before. So if you got 1 P, we get striping. But if it's 2 Ps, then it's stripping. The vowel changes from an I to an I.
Yeah.
So maybe we don't normally double the X because the letter X is like not 1 consonant but 2. It's like a K and a S. So doubling it would be weird. It's like you have the word salting or halting, but you would never double the L and or the T. It just seems to work differently. What do you think?
There's not that many X's in general in words. It's not a very common letter. It's the first thing. And then the amount of consonants makes you change the vowel before, not necessarily as much about the consonant. So the consonant shouldn't matter too much.
Yep.
But yeah. Doxing, I could imagine. Yeah, I just don't think it's a very common letter, and that's why it's not happening. Is that boring? Sorry, did I ruin it?
Okay, now I'm going to try to think of a less common letter where it does happen. Q, no. Z? I mean, buzzing, but buzz already has 2 Zs. What's a Z with only fezzes?
Q is even rarer.
Q's weird.
Q is weird.
J. I can only think of one word
J's
with J,
fine.
2 J's, Haji, and that's the only one.
But you're also trying, Daniel, you're trying to look for sense in English spelling, and it's not the place.
I'm going to find the pattern, Hedwig. I've got to find this.
No. I think, yeah. I think the 2 X's in vaccinated is because there's 2 C's in vaccinated. That's it.
We've come back around to your good idea, and I don't want to admit that I wasted my time, so
yeah, sunk cost fallacy.
Exactly, but I probably did. Hedwig, I love your answer.
That's
So,
fine.
woke agenda, nul point, and maxinated our words of the week. Oh, also, our dear guests, have we heard the word chuggy in like the last week or so? Emma, you have.
Yeah, was that on your last episode?
Oh, you listened.
I did, yeah. And I had a little chuckle when I heard that word. Found it quite interesting.
Why did you chuckle?
Yes, why did you chuckle?
Interesting question.
I don't know. It just seems it seemed like it was almost like in jest, I guess you could use the word maybe, but maybe I'm not. I had never used the word before. And so when I Googled it, then it came up with like blogs where people were using the word to kind of, I don't know.
Anybody not sure? Kirsten, Georgia, you lost on this one?
Yeah.
Basically, the whole internet thought that cool TikTokers was using these words a lot and everyone started using it, but it seems like maybe the young people weren't using it that much.
Or they are? So the word, we figured out that the word kind of sits at the convergence of 5 different things, like daggy plus basic plus off-trend plus try-hard plus cringe.
Yeah.
But it turns out that everyone who was using chuggy last week is no longer using it, so you don't have to remember it now. Thank you very much. Let's have some quick comments. Our last episode was a live one where our Patreon patrons helped us determine that fish are indeed wet, that deceptively simple just means simple, and that if you got electrocuted, you did not necessarily die. A few people sent us comments. Adam on Facebook says, weekdays, I never use next Friday. Next Friday can be confusing because is it this Friday or is it the one after that? I always say which week it affects, the coming Friday or Friday this week.
That's good.
Friday the coming week, Friday the week after, yes.
Yeah.
Also,
I agree.
are fish wet? He says in diving, they talk about a wetsuit if it lets water through so your skin has contact with water, and dry suit if the suit insulates your skin from the surrounding water. I thought that was interesting because you can be in the water and still be dry, in a sense.
Yeah.
I need everyone's help on this one. Zach on Twitter, ZammyBR, says, I just thought of this one after listening to your episode. If I'm in my underwear and I say something to the effect of, let me get out of my underwear, am I putting on pants or am I getting naked? I can't tell.
You're getting naked.
Okay, Hedvig, we've got a vote for nude. Any other votes?
Emma's nodding hesitantly. I agree. It's unclear, but I think you're getting nude.
Okay. There's another one that I found. If I say I had to walk 10 kilometers there and back.
Yeah.
How far away was
Is
it?
it 20 or 10?
Was it 5 or 10?
Yeah. I have a 5 kilometer commute to work. Is your house 5 kilometers or 2.5 away from work?
So we're going to attack that one on an upcoming episode. I also, Tyson on Twitter at Seburnt said, this was a great episode that both enlightened and infuriated me. I chuckled and cursed at the results of these polls. Isn't that wonderful? It had the intended effect.
That's good. I like cursing. Yeah. Isn't that the new world of content? Is you got to engage people, be it negative or positive.
There you go. Engagement.
We made people mad.
Getting clicks.
Great.
Love it. We did it. No bad publicity. Let's say a big thank you to our Pint of Science guests, Emma Schimke, Georgia Dempster, and Kirsten Ellis. Thanks so much for joining us. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Those were all of our lovely comments, and if you would like to leave us some more comments, you can do us in much the same way. So most of these comments, I believe, came from Twitter, so you can tweet at us. We are Because Lang Pod on Twitter. We are also the same thing, Because Lang Pod on Facebook, Instagram, Mastodon, Patreon, TikTok, Clubhouse. If you find another social media, Daniel will create an account for us there.
I will.
You can also send a good old-fashioned email. We are hello@becauselanguage.com. And if you liked our show, tell a friend about us. I think this is the most likely way that podcasts get new podcast listeners is if you like it and you know someone else who has similar interest, tell them about it and they can check it out and see if they like it as well. Also, feel free to leave us a rating at all the places you can leave a rating and a review. And as always, we're thankful to Dustin of Salmon Stories, who continues to go on Twitter and say that people should listen to our show whenever they ask for random podcast recommendations.
Amazing.
Which is a brave thing to do on Twitter. All of those things, tweeting about us, telling a friend about us, and leaving us a review will help people find us. So we'd be very grateful if you did that. We have got a review.
A new review.
A review from Kirsten, and the title is Thought-Provoking and Fun. And then there's a paragraph. I'm not sure I should read all of it. Should I?
Why don't you?
Okay, Chriselle says, I feel anyone can find something on each show to get excited about, almost like you want to participate in the conversation the hosts are having to ask more questions or give more examples. It's the first podcast I've ever listened to, and wow,
I know.
Oh God. And I've been following it for a few years. It's so well researched and rich in content that I'm always having things I want to learn more about after I listen to an episode. The hosts and guests are very funny too, so it's a great combination. Oh wow, we were someone's podcast virginity.
Why would you not want to read all of that? I'm just savoring just all of that.
Well, you're American, you take to flattery better, I think.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Our show has transcripts. The wonderful Maya Klein of Voicing Words listens to every word we say and writes them down. And that's good because if you can't listen or you just don't want to listen to a podcast, it means that you can still get all of our yummy content. And also you can search for who says what, that one thing that you can never find. It's our patrons that make these transcripts possible, and we just wanted to give a quick shout out to our top patrons: Dustin, Termy, Chris B, Chris L, Matt, Whitney, Damien, Joanna, Helen, Bob, Jack, Kitty, Lord Mortis, Lissa, Elias, Erica, Michael, Larry, Bin, Christopher, Andy, Mai, James, Nigel, Kate, Nasrin, River, Nikolai, Aisha, Moe, Steele, Andrew, Manu, James, Shane, Eloise, Roger, Rianne, Jonathan, Colleen, Glyph, Ignacio, and Kevin. Big thanks to all of our patrons for your support. Thanks also to Pint of Science for putting this show together. Our theme music has been written and performed by Drew Kuklyanov, who's a member of Ryan Bino and Obdidian's Bible. Thanks for listening. We'll catch you next time, because language.